Heaven's Gate, the cult that reached for the stars. Part 1. The world before the gate. To understand Heaven's Gate, you have to understand the 1970s in America. It was a decade of fracture. The Vietnam War had broken something in the national spirit. Watergate had confirmed what many already suspected, that power was corrupt and institutions could not be trusted. Young people in particular were adrift. They had grown up being told that America was good, that science had all the answers, that progress was inevitable. And then they watched it all fall apart on television. Into that void rushed 1,000 different voices. Gurus flew in from India. New religious movements sprouted in California like wildflowers after rain. ESD, Scientology, the Moonies, the Children of God. Each one promised something the mainstream could not, meaning belonging and a truth that went deeper than anything the government or the church had offered. This was the world that Marshall Applewhite stepped into, and he came with a story unlike any other. Marshall Herf Applewhite was born on May 17, 1931 in Spur, Texas. His father was a Presbyterian minister, and Marshall grew up in the shadow of the church. He was, by all accounts, a gifted young man. He had a beautiful baritone voice. He studied music. He taught at the University of Alabama and at St. Thomas University in Houston. He directed operas. He had been married and had children. On the surface, his life looked like one of accomplishment and respectability. But underneath, something was pulling at him. He struggled with his identity. He struggled specifically with his sexuality. He was a gay man in mid-century America, at a time when that was not something you could be openly. And so that tension lived inside him, unresolved, a pressure that built year after year. In 1970, he was dismissed from St. Thomas University. The reasons given were vague, but it was related to an inappropriate relationship with a male student. His marriage had already ended. His career in academia was over. He was, in many ways, starting from nothing. And then he met Bonnie Nettles. Bonnie Lou Trousdale Nettles was born on April 29, 1927 in Houston, Texas. She was a registered nurse. She was also deeply, fervently interested in the mystical and the metaphysical. She studied theosophy, the occult, astrology, and channeling. She believed she communicated with spirits, including a 19th century monk she called Brother Francis. When she and Applewhite met in 1972, she was married with 4 children. He was recovering from a mental health crisis, having checked himself into a psychiatric hospital. The circumstances of their meeting are themselves almost mythological. Different accounts say they met at a hospital where she was a nurse. Others say they met through mutual acquaintances interested in spirituality. What everyone agrees on is this: from the moment they met, something locked into place between them. Applewhite would later say that he recognized her immediately on a soul level from a previous life. Nettles felt the same. They believed 2 beings with a cosmic mission, and very quickly they began to develop what that mission was. They called themselves Bo and Peep. Later, the two, later still, Do and T.I., after the musical notes, they began travelling together, talking to anyone who would listen. They held small meetings in people's living rooms, in parks, in rented halls. The message they delivered was unlike anything anyone had heard before. It was not purely Christian. It was not purely science fiction. It was a fusion of the two, a new mythology built for the space age. Here is what they taught. The Earth, they said, was like a garden, and humanity was a garden that had been seeded long ago by beings from a higher level of existence. These beings were not supernatural in the traditional sense. They were not gods made of light and spirit. They were physical beings who had evolved beyond human limitations. They existed at what Bo and Peep called the next level. The next level was a real place. It operated in the physical universe. Its inhabitants had physical bodies, but those bodies were highly refined, androgynous, genderless, without the appetites and drives that plagued human beings. They did not need food in the way we do. They did not have sexuality. They did not age or die in the conventional sense. And crucially, they travelled through space in crafts. UFOs. What humanity called flying saucers were, according to Bo and Peep, the vehicles of next-level beings going about their business in the universe. Now here is where Jesus enters the picture, because Bo and Peep did not reject Christianity. They reframed it. They taught that the being known as Jesus of Nazareth was not God in the traditional sense. He was a next-level being who had been sent to Earth on a mission. He had taken on a human body as a kind of vehicle. His purpose was to demonstrate the process of transformation, to show humans what it looked like to leave behind human consciousness and graduate to the next level. The crucifixion, they said, was not a sacrifice for sin. It was a demonstration of the shedding of the human vehicle, and the resurrection was not a miracle. It was a next level being retrieving its member. The body was taken aboard a craft. Jesus was returned to the next level, and now Bo and Peep taught that same being had returned. Applewhite did not initially claim to be Jesus outright, but the implication was there from the beginning. He and Nettles together claimed to be the two witnesses spoken of in the book of Revelation, the two who would be killed and then resurrected before the eyes of the world, the two who would herald the end of an age. In the fall of 1975, something happened that changed everything. Bo and Peep held a meeting in a small town in Oregon called Waldport. About 200 people came, and when it was over, 20 or so of them simply left. They left their jobs, their families, their homes. They followed Bo and Peep into the wilderness. The group spent years nomadic, moving from campsite to campsite across the American West. They held odd jobs. They lived out of vans and tents. They called themselves Human Individual Metamorphosis, or HIM. The idea was that they were undergoing a transformation, like a caterpillar in a cocoon. They were leaving behind their human selves, preparing to graduate to the next level. The news media picked up the story of the Waldport disappearances and ran with it. Headlines about a UFO cults stealing people from their families. And for a brief moment, Bo and Peep and their followers were national news. Then the spotlight faded, and the group went underground. Or rather, they went back to the desert, and something began to change within them. Part 2. The long preparation. The years between 1976 and 1993 are, in some ways, the quietest part of the Heaven's Gate story. The group moved constantly. They lived in rented houses, in camps, in mobile homes. They worked odd jobs. They maintained strict discipline within the group. Applewhite, who increasingly went by the name Do, pronounced like the musical note, established what he called the classroom. It was a set of behaviours and practices designed to strip away humanness. Members were encouraged to give up their attachments, to family, to sex, to personal possessions. They were assigned partners called check partners, who were specifically chosen to be people they were unlikely to form romantic attachments to. They were encouraged to wear androgynous clothing. Several male members, including Applewhite himself, underwent voluntary castration. This was not coerced, he insisted. It was a way of removing the distraction of sexuality, of becoming more like the next level beings they were preparing to become. The group's beliefs also evolved. Nettles and Applewhite had initially taught that the physical body would be transformed, that it would be changed into a next-level vehicle while still alive. But in 1985, Bonnie Nettles died of liver cancer. This was a profound crisis for the group. If T.I., as Nettles was called, was a next-level being, how could she die of cancer? Applewhite reworked the theology. He taught that T.I. had returned to the next level ahead of him to prepare the way. He taught that her human vehicle had simply been shed, like a suit of clothes, and that she was waiting. On a craft, waiting for the rest of them to follow. This was the moment when physical death became not just acceptable, but desirable. Not suicide in the conventional sense, but the shedding of a container that was no longer needed. By the early 1990s, the group had settled into a more stable existence. They had become proficient at web design and computer work, which in the mid-1990s was a booming industry. They called their business Higher Source. They built websites for companies across the country. They were, by all accounts, professional and reliable. Clients often had no idea they were working with a UFO cult. The members lived together in a large rented house, first in various locations, and eventually in Rancho Santa Fe, California, a wealthy enclave north of San Diego. They wore matching outfits. They had short, androgynous haircuts. They followed a precise daily schedule. They called each other by gender-neutral names. And through it all, Do, as Applewhite was known, continued to teach. He recorded hundreds of hours of video. He wrote extensively, and he continued to watch the sky. In 1993, the group went public again. They took out a full-page advertisement in USA Today. The headline read, "UFO cult resurfaces with the same message, time to leave." They held meetings. They posted on early internet forums. They launched a website called Heaven's Gate. The site was in some ways ahead of its time. It was dense with text, with scripture, with detailed explanations of next-level cosmology. It invited people to read, to consider, to make their own choice. There was no hard sell. There was almost a detachment to it. Come if you choose to come. This is what we know. Take it or leave it. A handful of new members joined in these years, but the group never grew beyond about 40 people. And by 1996, the clock was running out. At least, that is what Do believed. Part 3. The Hale-Bopp Convergence. In the summer of 1995, astronomers Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp independently discovered a comet. It was designated Comet Hale-Bopp, and it was, by any measure, spectacular. It was one of the brightest comets of the 20th century, visible to the naked eye for record stretches of time. By late 1996 and into early 1997, it dominated the night sky. People all over the world were watching it, and within Heaven's Gate it became a sign, a signal, the moment they had been waiting for. The idea that a spacecraft was trailing the comet began to circulate in conspiratorial corners of the early internet. A remote viewer named Courtney Brown claimed that an object was following Hale-Bopp. An amateur astronomer posted a photograph that seemed to show a Saturn-like object near the comet. The story spread. The mainstream media covered it briefly, skeptically. Astronomers said it was a camera artifact, a star, nothing more. But inside Heaven's Gate, the news landed like thunder. Do seized on it. He taught the group that the craft trailing Hale-Bopp was there for them. It was the pickup vehicle. Bonnie Nettles was on that craft, waiting. And now, as the comet made its closest approach to Earth, the window was open. The time had come to shed the human vehicles and join the next level. The group began to make preparations. They filmed a series of farewell videos. Each member, seated before a camera, calmly explained who they were and why they were leaving. They were not sad. They were not distressed. They were, or at least appeared to be, at peace. One woman said she had never felt so certain about anything in her life. One man said he was excited. Another said he had been waiting for this moment for 20 years. They called themselves away team members who were finally going home. They packed small bags as if for a journey. They each carried a $5 bill and 3 quarters. No one knows exactly what the money was for. Some said it was a practical joke, a nod to some phrase about always having bus fare. Others thought it was symbolic. They wore identical black shirts and black pants. They wore new black Nike sneakers. They covered themselves with purple shrouds. And they died. Part 4. The Discovery. It was the 26th of March, 1997. A former member of Heaven's Gate, living in Phoenix, Arizona, received a package in the mail. It contained videotapes, farewell videos. She knew immediately what it meant. She called the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Deputies were dispatched to a large rented mansion at 1820-41 Colina Norte in Rancho Santa Fe. They knocked. They entered. What they found inside would stay with them for the rest of their lives. 39 people lying in bunk beds, on mattresses, on the floor. Each one covered with a purple diamond-shaped shroud. Their faces and chests were covered. Their arms were at their sides. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no chaos, only a terrible stillness. The cause of death was a combination of phenobarbital mixed into pudding and applesauce, washed down with vodka. They had also tied plastic bags over their heads to ensure loss of consciousness. It had been done in stages. Some had helped the others, and then been helped in turn. The oldest victim was 72 years old. The youngest was 26. Marshall Applewhite himself, was found among them. He was 65 years old. The world was stunned. This was not Jonestown, where people had been threatened and coerced. By all available evidence, every person in that house had chosen to be there, had chosen to drink the mixture, had chosen to lay down. The videos they left behind showed no fear, no hesitation, no sign of pressure. Just calm, just certainty. That certainty was perhaps the most disturbing thing of all. Part 5. Who were they? It is easy and perhaps natural to dismiss the Heaven's Gate members as confused, damaged, or mentally ill. And certainly some of them had struggled before they joined the group. Some had histories of depression, of searching, of feeling out of place in the world. But many of them had not. Many were by all external measures functional, intelligent, capable human beings. There were former nurses, former teachers, former military personnel. There were people who had left behind careers and families not because they were broken, but because they genuinely believed. Rio D'Angelo, a former member who left the group before the mass death, has spent years since trying to explain who these people were. He has said that they were not mindless followers. They were people who had found something that answered every question they had ever had. And once you have found that, the world outside looks dim by comparison. That is the quiet horror of Heaven's Gate. Not that the members were weak, but that the human need for meaning is so powerful, so fundamental, that it can override almost everything else. Thomas Nichols was among the dead. He was the brother of the actress Nichelle Nichols, famous for her role as Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. His presence in the group has often been noted as a kind of cruel irony, given that Star Trek was itself a vision of humanity reaching toward the stars. But his sister did not see it as irony. She saw it as a tragedy, a brother she had not been able to reach. That is the other story that runs alongside the Heaven's Gate story. The families left behind. The parents and siblings and adult children who had watched someone they loved drift away, year by year, until they were unreachable. Some had tried intervention. Some had hired deprogrammers. Many had simply prayed that one day the phone would ring and a familiar voice would say, "I'm coming home." Part 6. The Theology Examined. It is worth taking a moment to sit with the Heaven's Gate belief system, not to mock it, but to understand it, because in some ways it is more internally consistent than many more accepted belief systems. The next level cosmology drew on real traditions. The Gnostic idea that the physical world is a trap, a fallen place, and that the soul must escape it. The Christian idea of resurrection and transformation, of dying to the old self and being born again. The theosophical idea of a hierarchy of spiritual beings, of evolution through lifetimes and stages, and it added the modern mythological layer of science fiction. UFOs, the cosmos, the vastness of space as a canvas for the divine. In an age when traditional religion was losing its grip on many people, Heaven's Gate offered something that felt more rational, more aligned with what science was revealing about the scale of the universe. If the universe is infinite, if there are billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, why would spiritual life be limited to one small planet? Why would God be a bearded figure on a throne, rather than an advanced civilization capable of traversing the stars? These questions are not crazy. They are questions that serious thinkers have asked. The difference, of course, is the conclusion that Applewhite drew, that he specifically was a next-level being, that his group specifically had been chosen, that this specific comet was the sign. The specificity is where the leap of faith became a leap off a cliff. And yet, and this is perhaps the most uncomfortable part, that leap is structurally identical to leaps that billions of people make every day. Every religion requires its adherents to believe on faith that certain specific claims are true, that a specific person was divine, that a specific book is the word of God, that a specific set of practices will lead to salvation. Heaven's Gate was different in degree, not in kind. Its demands were more total, its conclusions more radical, its end more catastrophic. But the mechanism was the same. This is not to say that all religions are equivalent to Heaven's Gate. That would be absurd. It is simply to say that the human capacity for belief is vast and deep, and that understanding Heaven's Gate requires us to take that capacity seriously, rather than writing the members off as simply deluded. They were human, and that is the point. Part 7. What happened to Heaven's Gate after? Here is something strange. Heaven's Gate is not gone. The website is still online. It has been maintained since the deaths by a small number of former members who believed in the teachings but for various reasons were not present in Rancho Santa Fe in March of 1997. Two in particular, who go by the names Mark and Sarah King, have maintained the site and answered correspondence for decades. They believe that Do and T.I. and the others successfully graduated to the next level. They do not know exactly what role, if any, they themselves will play in what comes next, but they feel a responsibility to keep the information available for anyone who might be ready to receive it. There is something extraordinary about that. A website from 1997, still live, still maintained. A digital shrine to a belief system that most of the world regards as a cautionary tale. And if you visit it, which you can right now today, you will find it exactly as it was. The purple background, the logo of two figures reaching upward, the earnest, detailed, patient explanations of cosmology and scripture and the nature of the next level, waiting for anyone who might be ready to hear. Part 8. Why does Heaven's Gate still matter? We are living in an age of information abundance and epistemic crisis. There has never been more information available to more people, and there has perhaps never been more confusion about which of that information is true. Social media has created systems that reward certainty over nuance, that spread the vivid and the outrageous faster than the dull and the accurate, that connect people across geography and create communities of shared belief that can become hermetically sealed against outside influence. Heaven's Gate in the 1970s and 80s operated through newsletters and in-person meetings and word of mouth. Imagine what it could have become with YouTube and Reddit and Telegram. This is not a hypothetical. We have seen, in the years since 1997, the rise of movements that share structural features with Heaven's Gate, charismatic leaders, a mythology that explains everything, a sense of elite status, of being among the few who truly understand, a demand for total commitment, a hostility toward outside information. The specifics vary enormously. Some are political, some are religious, some are bizarre mixtures of both, but the structure is recognizable, and the end results, when they come, are often recognizable too. Heaven's Gate also raises questions about autonomy and belief that we have not fully resolved. When adults voluntarily choose to believe something and voluntarily choose to act on that belief, even fatally, what is the proper response from the rest of society? The members of Heaven's Gate were not, by legal definition, murdered. The investigations that followed found no evidence of coercion. The deaths were ruled suicides. But were they? If a belief system is so total, so immersive, so effective at reshaping the way a person sees reality, can we meaningfully speak of a free choice to die? Is someone truly free if they have been in an enclosed community for 20 years, have surrendered all outside relationships and income and identity, and have been told daily that the world outside is a spiritually toxic place? These are not easy questions. They are questions that philosophers and psychologists and legal scholars continue to grapple with. Heaven's Gate puts them in their starkest form. 39 people chose to die, or were they led to die? And where is the line? Part 9. It would be easy to make Marshall Applewhite a monster. A manipulator, a predator, a man who convinced 38 people to follow him into death for the sake of his own ego and need for control. And there are elements of that. His theology placed himself at the center of the cosmos. He was the representative of the next level, the one who had been sent, the one who understood, that is, at minimum, a grandiosity that served him. But the people who knew him, including former members who left the group and lived to tell about it, describe something more complicated. They describe a man who was, in his own way, genuinely sincere, who believed what he taught, who was at times kind, who was capable of warmth and humour, who was also capable of cruelty and control and manipulation, who was, like most humans, a mixture. The question that haunts Heaven's Gate is whether Applewhite knew on some level that he was not what he claimed to be, that he was not a next-level being, that the spacecraft was not trailing the comet, that he was, in the end, a man with a broken life who had invented a story to make sense of it, and whether, if he knew that, he still chose to lead those 38 people to their deaths, or whether he died believing, genuinely, that he was taking them home. We cannot know. And the question will remain open forever. Part 10. The Legacy. In the years since 1997, Heaven's Gate has become a shorthand for cultic excess. A reference point? Documentaries have been made. Books have been written. Podcasts and YouTube channels have returned to it again and again. In recent years, there has been a notable upsurge in interest, particularly among younger audiences who encounter the story for the first time and find in it something that resonates. Not because they want to join a UFO cult, but because the story touches something real, the longing for meaning, the exhaustion of a world that offers abundance but not answers, the appeal of community, of belonging, of being part of something larger than yourself. Those are not crazy desires. They are human desires, and they will not go away. Heaven's Gate is a story about what happens when those desires are captured by a cosmology that cannot be questioned, when the longing for transcendence is channeled into something closed and final, when the group becomes everything and the world outside becomes nothing. The lesson is not simply be skeptical of UFO cults. The lesson is harder than that. Be attentive to the needs that make you vulnerable. Be aware of when a community begins to demand your total self. Be willing to hold your beliefs lightly enough that evidence and love and connection can still reach you. Be suspicious of certainty, especially when certainty is comforting, especially when it explains everything, especially when it asks everything in return. The conclusion and final thoughts. On the evening of March 26, 1997, as the Hale-Bopp comet blazed in the spring sky over Southern California, 39 people lay down to sleep and did not wake up. They believed, each of them, that they were not dying. They believed they were going home. We cannot know what they experienced in those final moments, whether there was peace or fear or something else entirely. We know only that they were human beings, with parents and childhoods and memories and dreams, with histories that predated their membership in Heaven's Gate, with selves that existed before Do gave them new names and new identities. They are gone now, and the comet Hale-Bopp has continued its journey. It will return, astronomers estimate, in approximately 4,530 years. No craft was seen trailing it. No pickup arrived. The sky offered no sign. Only the comet, cold and silent, tracing its ancient arc across the dark, and the quiet of that house in Rancho Santa Fe, purple shrouds, Nike sneakers, and 39 human beings who wanted more than anything to belong to something infinite. Heaven's Gate, the cult that reached for the stars. Thank you for listening to History's Mysterious Minds audio podcast. If this story made you think, if it unsettled you, or if it simply reminded you how powerful belief can be, we're glad you were here with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you never miss a mystery. Share it with someone who loves history's darker corners, and leave a comment. It truly helps others find the show. History is full of unanswered questions, and we're only just getting started. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring the unknown.